Welcome to True Crime Cases, where we delve into the darkest corners of human nature. Today's episode unravels a tale of father's secret gay love affair with son's best friend, ends in grisly murder. The summer of 2023 began like any other. Manicured lawns stretched before grand houses, children's laughter echoed from backyard pools, and neighbors exchanged pleasantries over white picket fences. Among these idyllic scenes, the Hartley family stood out as pillars of the community, respected, admired, and seemingly untouchable. Little did anyone know that beneath this perfect exterior, a storm was brewing, would soon shatter the peace of their quiet neighborhood and send shockwaves through the entire state. Michael Hartley, 48, was a name synonymous with success in Brentwood. A real estate mogul with a golden touch, he had transformed the local property market over the past 2 decades. His company, Hartley Homes, was responsible for developing some of the most sought-after residential areas in the region. Known for his charismatic personality and philanthropic efforts, Michael was a fixture at every major community event, always ready with a warm smile and a generous donation. His wife, Melissa Hartley, 45, matched her husband's status with her own impressive credentials. Pediatric surgeon at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Melissa was renowned for her skill in the operating room and her compassionate bedside manner. Parents throughout Tennessee saw her out for complex procedures, trusting her steady hands and keen mind with the lives of their children. Together, Michael and Melissa were the embodiment of the American dream. Successful, charitable, and admired by all who knew them. The Hartley son, Jason, 19, seemed destined to follow in his parents' illustrious footsteps. A sophomore at Vanderbilt University, he was studying pre-med with plans to specialize in pediatrics like his mother. Handsome, intelligent, and kind-hearted, Jason was the pride of his parents and the envy of his peers. His future seemed bright and assured, continuation of the Hartley legacy of excellence. But every family has its secret, and the Hartleys were no exception. Hidden behind closed doors and carefully maintained facades, a tension had been building for years, threatening to tear apart the very foundation of their perfect life. At the center of this brewing storm was Ryan Thompson, 20, Jason's best friend since childhood, and a constant presence in the Hartley household. Ryan was everything the Hartleys appreciated in Jason's friends. Smart, ambitious, and from a good family. The son of a local judge and a high school English teacher, Ryan had grown up alongside Jason, sharing classes, sports teams, and countless sleepovers. Now a junior at the University of Tennessee studying architecture, Ryan still spent most of his weekends and holidays in Brentwood, often staying with the Hartleys when he wasn't with his own family. To most observers, Ryan's closeness with the Hartley family seemed natural and heartwarming. Michael and Melissa had always treated him like a second son, supporting his ambitions and celebrating his achievements alongside Jason's. But beneath this familial affection lay a darker current, one that had been gaining strength over the years, unnoticed by all but its source. Michael Hartley had a secret so profound and disturbing that he had buried it deep within himself, refusing to acknowledge its existence, even in his most private thought. As Ryan had grown from a gangly teenager into a handsome young man, Michael found himself increasingly drawn to him in ways that went far beyond paternal affection. What had started as a fleeting, shameful thought had, over time, developed into a full-blown obsession. At first, Michael had been able to rationalize his feelings as a midlife crisis. Armless appreciation for youth and vitality. He threw himself into his work, spent long hours at the gym trying to recapture his own youth, and devoted even more time to his family. But as the years passed, feelings only intensified. Michael found himself making excuses to be around when Ryan visited, lingering in doorways to watch him interact with Jason, and even on occasion, driving past the Thompson house on his way to work, hoping for a glimpse of Ryan leaving for school. The guilt and shame that accompanied these feelings were overwhelming. Michael knew that what he was experiencing was wrong on multiple levels. Not only was Ryan young enough to be his son, but he was also his son's best friend. The betrayal inherent in these desires ate away at Michael, causing him to withdraw from his family and friends. Melissa noticed the change in her husband. attributing it to stress from work, or perhaps a mild depression. She suggested therapy, which Michael vehemently refused, afraid that speaking his thoughts aloud would make them real, in a way he wasn't prepared to face. As the summer of 2023 approached, the situation reached a boiling point. Jason had secured a prestigious internship at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, following in his mother's medical footsteps. This meant he would be away for the entire summer, leaving Ryan without his usual reason for visiting the Hartley home. Michael, rather than feeling relief at the removal of temptation, found himself engineering reasons for Ryan to come around. He offered Ryan a summer job at Hartley Homes, ostensibly to give the aspiring architect some real-world experience in property development. Ryan, eager for the opportunity and unaware of the ulterior motives, accepted enthusiastically. Melissa, proud of her husband for mentoring Jason's friend, encouraged the arrangement, and so, unwittingly, the stage was set for tragedy. The events that unfolded on the night of July 15, 2023, would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. Melissa was working a late shift at the hospital, covering for a colleague who had fallen ill. Jason was in Boston, excitedly sharing stories of his internship during his nightly call with his parents, and Michael found himself alone in the house with Ryan, working late on a project proposal. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in Michael's home office grew increasingly tense. Ryan, oblivious to the older man's inner turmoil, worked diligently on his laptop, occasionally asking questions or sharing ideas. Michael, his resolve weakened by proximity and the lateness of the hour, found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Ryan's face, tracing the line of his jaw, the curve of his neck. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, Michael broke the silence. "Ryan," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I need to tell you something." Ryan looked up, curious and unsuspecting. What followed was a confession that would shatter the foundations of multiple lives. Michael poured out his feelings, years of pent-up emotion spilling forth in a torrent of words. He spoke of his attraction, his shame, his desperate attempts to suppress his desires. Ryan, at first confused and then horrified, sat frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. As Michael's confession turned to pleas and then to demands, Ryan finally found his voice, rejecting the older man's advances in no uncertain terms. What happened next remains a subject of speculation and debate. The physical evidence, later meticulously catalogued by forensic teams, told a case of violence and desperation. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, and spattered blood painted a gruesome picture of a struggle that had moved from the office through the living room and into the kitchen. The next morning, at precisely 7:42 a.m., Melissa Hartley returned home from her overnight shift. Exhausted and looking forward to a quiet day off, she was instead confronted with a scene of unimaginable horror. The house, usually immaculate, was in disarray. A trail of destruction led her to the kitchen, where she found Ryan Thompson's body, brutally beaten and stabbed multiple times. The murder weapon, a knife from their own cutlery set, lay discarded nearby. As Melissa stood frozen in shock, trying to comprehend the scene before her, a sound from the corner of the room drew her attention. There, huddled in a ball and covered in blood, was her husband Michael. His eyes were wild and unfocused, his mumbling incoherent. In that moment, Melissa's world collapsed around her as the reality of the situation began to sink in. With hands shaken so badly she could barely operate her phone, Melissa dialed 911. The dispatcher would later remark on the eerie calmness in Melissa's voice as she reported the crime, a detachment born of deep shock and years of medical training kicking in to help her process the unthinkable. Within minutes, the quiet street was alive with the sound of sirens as police cars and ambulances converged on the Hartley residence. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, gathered in small groups on their lawns, whispering and pointing as they tried to piece together what was happening at the home of Brentwood's most prominent family. Detective Laura Chen, of the Brentwood Police Department, was the first officer on the scene. 15-year veteran of the force with a reputation for solving complex cases, Chen had seen her fair share of gruesome crime scene. But even she was unprepared for the tableau that greeted her inside the Hartley home. As she entered the kitchen, Chen's experienced eye took in every detail. The body of Ryan Thompson, barely recognizable due to the severity of his injuries. A blood-soaked knife on the floor. And in the corner, Michael Hartley, once the very picture of success and respectability, now a broken man covered in the blood of his victim. Melissa Hartley, her professional composure finally crumbling, broke down in the arms of a female officer as the reality of the situation fully hit her. Her husband was a murderer. Her son's best friend was dead, and the life she had built with such care over the past 2 decades had been irreparably shattered in a single night of violence. As word of the murder spread, the community of Brentwood reeled in disbelief. How could this happen here in their peaceful suburb? How could Michael Hartley, a man known for his generosity and community spirit, be capable of such a heinous act? The stark contrast between the Hartleys' public image and the gruesome reality of the crime scene left many feeling betrayed and questioning everything they thought they knew about their neighbors. The investigation that followed would uncover a tangled web of secrets and lies that had been festering beneath the surface for years. Detective Chen and her team meticulously combed through the Hartley home, collecting evidence that would piece together the events of that tragic night. Forensic analysts worked around the clock, processing DNA samples, fingerprints, and blood spatter patterns. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came in the form of Michael's personal laptop. Initially locked, cybercrime specialists managed to gain access, revealing a trove of information that shed light on Michael's hidden life. Emails, chat logs, and a carefully hidden folder of photos painted a picture of a man torn between his public persona and his private desires. The digital trail showed that Michael's infatuation with Ryan had begun years earlier, when Ryan was still a minor. While there was no evidence of any inappropriate contact during Ryan's childhood, the nature of Michael's feelings became increasingly clear as Ryan grew older. Particularly damning were a series of unsent draft emails addressed to Ryan, detailing Michael's struggles with his sexuality and his growing attraction to the young man. As the investigation progressed, friends and acquaintances of the Hartley family came forward with small details that, in hindsight, hinted at the turmoil beneath the surface. Melissa's colleagues at the hospital recalled instances where Michael had seemed overly interested in Ryan, asking detailed questions about the young man's life and future plans. Jason's friends remembered feeling uncomfortable at times with the way Michael looked at Ryan, though they had dismissed these feelings as paranoia. The most heart-wrenching testimony came from Jason Hartley himself, who rushed home from Boston upon hearing the news. Devastated by the loss of his best friend and the revelation of his father's secret life, Jason struggled to reconcile the loving father he knew with the monster who had committed this terrible act. In a statement to the police, Jason revealed that Ryan had confided in him just weeks before about feeling uneasy around Michael, though neither of them had understood the true nature of the situation at the time. As the case against Michael Hartley built, prosecution, led by District Attorney Elena Rodriguez, prepared for what promised to be one of the most high-profile trials in Tennessee's recent history. The charges against Michael were severe. First-degree murder, with the possibility of additional charges related to his long-term obsession with Ryan. The trial, which began in early 2024, captivated the nation. The courtroom was packed daily with spectators, journalists, and members of both the Hartley and Thompson families. Melissa Hartley, still grappling with the destruction of her family and the betrayal of her husband, tended each day, her face a mask of grief and disbelief. Prosecutor Rodriguez painted a damning picture of Michael Hartley as a man who had lived a lie for decades, ultimately unable to control his desires and resorting to violence when faced with rejection. The defense, led by high-profile attorney James Lawson, argued that Michael had suffered a psychotic break, claiming temporary insanity at the time of the murder. As the trial progressed, expert witnesses were called to testify about Michael's mental state. Psychologists debated whether his actions were the result of a sudden break from reality, or the culmination of years of repressed sexuality and mounting pressure. The jury listened intently as Michael's carefully constructed double life was laid bare before the court. Perhaps the most powerful moment of the trial came during Melissa Hartley's testimony. Speaking publicly for the first time since the murder, Melissa's voice quavered as she described her shock and horror at discovering her husband's secret. She spoke of the guilt she felt for not recognizing the signs, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that had shattered her world. Her raw emotion moved many in the courtroom to tears, driving home the human cost of Michael's actions. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Michael Hartley was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Michael remained stoic, showing little emotion. Melissa and Jason Hartley, seated in the front row, clung to each other, their relief at the verdict tempered by the knowledge that their lives would never be the same. In the aftermath of the trial, the community of Brentwood struggled to come to terms with the tragedy that had unfolded in their midst. The Hartley home, once a symbol of success and happiness, stood empty, a silent reminder of the secrets it had harbored. Melissa Hartley, unable to bear the memories, put the house on the market and moved away, seeking a fresh start for herself and Jason. Ryan Thompson's family, while grateful for the justice served, were left to grapple with the senseless loss of their son. They established a scholarship in Ryan's name at the University of Tennessee's School of Architecture, ensuring that his passion for design would live on through future generations. Students. As months turned into years, the case of Michael Hartley became a cautionary tale. Studied by law enforcement and mental health professionals alike, it sparked important conversations about the dangers of repressed sexuality, the pressure of societal expectations, and the importance of open communication within family. For those who knew the Hartleys, the tragedy served as a stark reminder that even those who seem to have it all may be fighting inner battles that others cannot see. The case prompted many in the community to reach out to friends and loved ones, to check in and offer support, hoping to prevent another such tragedy from occurring. The ripple effects of the Hartley case extended far beyond Brentwood. LGBTQ+ advocacy groups used the case to highlight the devastating consequences of societal pressure and the importance of acceptance and support for individuals struggling with their sexuality. Mental health organizations pointed to the Hartley case as evidence of the need for greater access to counseling and support services, particularly in communities where maintaining a certain image can take precedence over emotional well-being. In the years that followed, Melissa Hartley threw herself into her work at Vanderbilt University Medical Center with renewed vigor. Her colleagues marveled at her resilience as she channeled her grief into helping others, becoming an even more dedicated and compassionate doctor. She also became an advocate for mental health awareness, sharing her case at conferences and in medical journals, hoping that her family's tragedy could serve as a wake-up call for others. Jason Hartley, forever changed by the loss of his best friend and the revelation of his father's true nature, decided to change his career path. Instead of pursuing medicine, he switched his major to psychology, determined to understand the complexities of the human mind that could lead to such devastating actions. His experiences drove him to specialize in trauma therapy, with a particular focus on helping families affected by violent crimes. Michael Hartley, serving his life sentence at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, became a subject of intense study. Criminologists and psychologists. His case was featured in numerous academic papers and true crime documentaries, all seeking to understand the complex factors that had led a seemingly upstanding citizen to commit such a horrific act. Michael himself remained largely silent, refusing most interview requests and participating minimally in prison program. The Thompson family, while appreciative of the justice served, struggled to move forward in the wake of Ryan's death. Judge Thompson stepped down from the bench, unable to continue dispensing justice when he felt so profoundly failed by the system. Mrs. Thompson threw herself into managing the scholarship fund established in Ryan's name, finding solace in helping other young architects pursue their dreams. As time passed, the shock of the initial events began to fade, but the impact of the Hartley case continued to resonate. It became a part of Brentwood's lore, a case told in hushed tones, a reminder that even in the most picturesque of communities, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. The case also had a lasting impact on the legal system in Tennessee. Prosecutors and defense attorneys alike studied the Hartley trial, examining every aspect of how the case was handled. The complex nature of the crime, involving long-term grooming and repressed sexuality, led to discussions about updating laws to better address such situations. In response to the case, the Tennessee legislature introduced new bills aimed at strengthening protections for young adults and increasing penalties for crimes involving breach of trust. The Ryan-Thompson Act, as it came to be known, passed with bipartisan support, creating harsher sentences for adults in positions of authority who abused their power for sexual purposes. The media frenzy surrounding the case eventually died down, but the case of the Hartleys continued to fascinate the public. True crime podcasts dissected every detail of the investigation and trial. Books were written, attempting to understand the psychology behind Michael's actions and the impact on the community. A high-profile documentary series on a major streaming platform brought the case back into the national spotlight, reigniting debates about repressed sexuality, mental health, and the facade of suburban perfection. 5 years after the murder, Brentwood had changed. The community, once known for its privacy and exclusivity, had become more open and vigilant. Neighborhood watch programs flourished, and community events often featured speakers on topics like mental health awareness and recognizing signs of grooming or abuse. Melissa Hartley, now Melissa Brennan, after remarrying, had found a measure of peace. Her work in pediatric surgery continued to save lives, and her advocacy for mental health awareness had made her a respected voice in the medical community. She rarely spoke publicly about the tragedy anymore. Those close to her knew the pain never truly faded. Jason Hartley, now Dr. Jason Hartley, had completed his Ph.D. in clinical psychology and opened a practice specializing in trauma and family therapy. His personal experience with tragedy gave him a unique perspective that his patients found comforting and insightful. Though the loss of Ryan and the betrayal of his father still haunted him, Jason had found purpose in helping others navigate their own trauma. The Hartley home, once the pride of the neighborhood, had been sold and renovated. The new owners, a young family unconnected to Brentwood, had been drawn by the property's beauty, unaware of its dark history until after they had moved in. It chose to stay, determined not to let the past overshadow their future. Michael Hartley's life in prison was a stark contrast to the freedom and luxury once new. He spent his days in relative isolation, shunned by other inmates due to the nature of his crime. Attempts by journalists and researchers to interview him were met with silence. The man who once commanded rooms with his charisma now spoke to no one but his lawyers and the prison psychiatrist. As for the Thompsons, they had left Brentwood, unable to bear the constant reminders of their loss. They relocated to California, where Mrs. Thompson took a teaching position at a small college, and Judge Thompson found purpose in advocating for victims' rights. Scholarship in Ryan's name continued to grow, supporting aspiring architects and serving as a living memorial to the young man whose life had been cut tragically short. The case had far-reaching effects on the real estate industry in Brentwood and beyond. Hartley Homes, once a symbol of luxury and success, had been dissolved, its assets sold off to pay legal fees and settlement. The scandal had made buyers wary, and property values in the area took years to recover. Real estate agents found themselves fielding uncomfortable questions about the history of the properties they were selling, particularly those developed by Hartley Homes. In an unexpected turn of events, the case sparked a renaissance in local journalism. The Brentwood Gazette, a small local paper that had been struggling in the digital age, found new life in its comprehensive coverage of the Hartley case and its aftermath. Young journalists, inspired by the power of investigative reporting, flocked to the paper, determined to uncover other hidden truths in their community. The legal community in Tennessee continued to grapple with the implications of the case. Law schools added the Hartley trial to their curriculum, using it as a case study in criminal psychology, evidence gathering, and trial strategy. Debates raged about the intersection of mental health, sexuality, and criminal responsibility, with the Hartley case often at the center of these discussions. As the 10th anniversary of Ryan's death approached, Brentwood prepared for a somber commemoration. The town council, after much debate, decided to erect a memorial in the local park. The design, created by a student who had benefited from the Ryan Thompson Scholarship, featured a sculpture of an unfinished building, symbolizing the promise cut short and the ongoing nature of healing and growth. On the day of the memorial's unveiling, Melissa and Jason Hartley returned to Brentwood for the first time in years. Their presence caused a stir, but the community welcomed them with open arms, recognizing the courage it took for them to face the place where their lives had changed so dramatically. As they stood before the memorial, surrounded by friends old and new, there was a sense of collective healing, of a community that had been broken but was slowly piecing itself back together. The case of the Hartleys and Ryan Thompson had become more than just a tragic tale of murder. It had evolved into a complex narrative about the human capacity for both darkness and resilience. It served as a reminder of the importance of authenticity, open communication, and mental health support. It challenged assumptions about success and appearances, forcing people to look beyond facades and truly see one another. In courtrooms, classrooms, and living rooms across the country, case continued to be discussed and debated. It had become a touchstone for conversations about sexuality, power dynamics, and the sometimes tragic consequences of living in denial. Psychologists pointed to Michael Hartley as an extreme example of the dangers of repressing one's true self. While sociologists examined how societal pressures and expectations contributed to the perfect storm that led to tragedy. The tech industry also felt the impact of the case. Social media companies, aware of how Michael had used their platforms to follow and obsess over Ryan, implemented new policies and algorithms to detect and prevent potential grooming behaviors. Privacy advocates, however, raised concerns about the balance between protection and surveillance. In an ironic twist, the area once developed by Hartley homes became known for its strong sense of community and openness. Neighbors, determined to prevent another tragedy, made conscious efforts to connect with one another, to notice when someone was struggling, and to offer support without judgment. Annual block parties and community events became opportunities for check-ins and strengthening bonds. As years passed, the raw pain of the tragedy began to dull, but its lessons remained sharp. Children who had been in school with Jason and Ryan grew up and had families of their own, carrying with them a heightened awareness of the importance of open communication and the dangers of keeping secret. They raised their children with a focus on emotional intelligence and self-acceptance, hoping to create a generation better equipped to handle the complexities, human emotions, and relationships. The case of the Hartleys and Ryan Thompson became a part of Brentwood's identity, a cautionary tale that reminded residents of the importance of looking beneath the surface and truly seeing one another. It was a case of tragedy, yes, but also one of resilience, of a community forever changed, but ultimately strengthened by facing the darkness that had lurked in its midst. In the end, the legacy of that fateful summer night in 2023 was not just one of loss and pain, but of growth, understanding, and the enduring human capacity to find light even in the darkest of circumstance. The tragedy had torn apart the fabric of a community, but in mending those tears, Brentwood had created something stronger, more compassionate, ultimately more real than the perfect facade it once presented to the world. As we conclude this deeply unsettling episode, I want to take a moment to reflect on the many layers of tragedy within this case. Case of Michael Hartley, a man who was once a pillar of his community, and the horrific crime that shattered so many lives, serves as a grim reminder of the destructive power of hidden desires and repressed emotions. It's a case that leaves us with more questions than answers, and a profound sense of sorrow for all those who were affected by the events that unfolded. True crime stories like this one can be incredibly difficult to process. They force us to confront the darker aspects of human nature, and the ways in which even the most seemingly upstanding individuals can be hiding secrets that, when brought to light, devastating consequences. The Hartley case is a stark illustration of the fact that appearances can be deceiving, and that we may never truly know the struggles and turmoil that others are facing behind closed doors. but it's also a case that calls for compassion and understanding. As we navigate through the complexities of this case, we are reminded of the importance of mental health awareness and the necessity of providing support to those who may be struggling in silence. The tragic outcome of Michael Hartley's repressed desires underscores the critical need for open communication and acceptance within our society, especially when it comes to matters of sexual identity. In reflecting on this case, we also must acknowledge the profound impact on the victims, those whose lives were forever altered by the events of that fateful night. Ryan Thompson, a young man with a bright future ahead of him, lost his life in a brutal and senseless act of violence. His family and friends, including Jason Hartley, are left to grapple with the immense loss and the betrayal that came from someone they trusted. The psychological scars from this tragedy will undoubtedly linger for years, not a lifetime. For Melissa Hartley, the discovery of her husband's dark secret and the subsequent unraveling of her life's work and family is a nightmare from which she may never fully recover. Her strength and resilience in the face of such overwhelming grief and shock are commendable, yet one can only imagine the deep pain that she endures each day. Her case is a poignant reminder of the collateral damage that such crimes inflict, extending far beyond the immediate act of violence. As we bring this episode to a close, I want to thank you, our viewers, for joining us in this journey into the heart of one of the most disturbing cases we've covered. It's not easy to hear these stories, but by doing so, we keep the memories of the victims alive and continue the vital conversations about the issues they bring to light. Please remember that if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health issues, there is help available. Reach out to friends, family, or professionals who can offer support. No one should have to face their struggles alone. We appreciate your continued support of true crime cases, and we hope that through our exploration of these dark stories, we can all gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of the human condition. Thank you for watching and for being a part of this community that values truth, justice, and compassion. As always, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you'll be alerted when our next episode is released. If this case impacted you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice is important in these discussions. We have many more stories to tell, each one shedding light on the complexities of crime, justice, and the human psyche. We hope you'll join us for the next episode, where we will continue to explore the dark corners of human nature and the criminal mind. Until then, stay safe, be kind to one another, and remember that behind every high, there are real people and real lives that have been forever changed. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on True Crime Case.